Oh, welcome back. We are in the midst of 40 days of resurrection appearances by Jesus. Quite often, we look at a resurrection experience on Easter Sunday and then move on to something else. Well, for now, what we're going to do is look at various resurrection appearances leading up to the day of Pentecost, because Jesus appeared to the disciples over a period of 40 days. And so today and for the next 2 weeks, we're going to be looking at some appearances in the 24th chapter of the book of Luke. In 2011, there was a movie released titled The Way. It was written and directed by Emilio Estevez, filmed entirely in Spain and France along the Camino de Santiago, the Way of St. James. It's a place where people go for a pilgrimage. And so the movie is about a pilgrimage and filmed actually on site. It stars Martin Sheen, who is Emilio's actual father. He plays Tom, an American doctor who goes to France following the death of his adult son, who was killed in the Pyrenees during a storm while walking the Camino de Santiago. Tom's purpose initially is just to retrieve his son's body. We discover in the movie that they were estranged. But in a combination of grief and also homage to his son, Tom decides to complete the journey that his son had started. And while walking the Camino, Tom meets others from around the world, all broken people looking for greater meaning in their lives. And along the way, Tom discovers the meaning of one of the last things his son said to him, and in the movie it's in a flashback. And that is simply, there's a difference between the life we live and the life we choose. Pilgrimages are pretty common in some areas of the world and have been fairly common throughout history. When Martin Luther made his pilgrimage to Rome, it was initially a discouraging experience, but it led him towards changes in his life which resulted in his becoming closer to God and eventually led to part of what we know of as the Protestant Reformation. Well, today we're looking at something that many people point to as one of the first pilgrimages of Christians. And it happened on the day that the disciples discovered the empty tomb. On the same day, we find two of them going off to Emmaus, a village about 7 miles from Jerusalem. And this is in the 24th chapter of the Gospel of Luke. As they went, they were in deep conversation about everything that had happened. While they were absorbed in their serious talk and discussion, Jesus himself approached and walked along with them, but something prevented them from recognizing him. Now we can assume from that statement that they were disciples who had been around Jesus enough to recognize him if he walked up and started accompanying them. Then he spoke to them. What is all this discussion that you are having on your walk? And they stopped, their faces drawn with misery, and the one called Cleopas replied, "You must be the only visitor in Jerusalem who hasn't heard all of the things that happened there recently." "What things?" asked Jesus. "All about Jesus from Nazareth. There was a man, a prophet, strong in what he did and what he said, in God's eyes as well as the people's. Haven't you heard how our chief priests and rulers handed him over for execution and had him crucified? But we were hoping he was the one to come and set Israel free. And if that were not enough, it's 3 days since all this has happened, and some of our women folk have disturbed us profoundly." I'm reading this from J.B. Phillips' translation, and I'm doing that because I really love the way he translated this passage, and that's one of the lines I really like. Some of our women folk have disturbed us profoundly. You see, Phillips puts it in a vernacular that you and I can grab and you and I can experience and live. For they went to the tomb at dawn, and then when they couldn't find his body, they said they had a vision of angels who said he was alive. Some of our people went straight off to the tomb and found things just as the women had described them, but they didn't see him. So the assumption is, of course, that these two, soon after they heard the news of the empty tomb, left and had not yet heard about any of the resurrection appearances. Then he, meaning Jesus, himself spoke to them. Oh, how foolish you are! How slow to believe in all that the prophets have said. Was it not inevitable that Christ should suffer like that and so find his glory? Then, beginning with Moses and all the prophets, he explained to them everything in the scriptures that referred to himself. What a profound experience for them to have at that point, to hear Jesus explain that everything had been foretold and that nothing has happened that was not foretold. They were now approaching the village to which they were going. He gave the impression that he meant to go on further, but they stopped him with the words, "Do stay with us. It's nearly evening and the day will soon be over," showing they have great gifts of hospitality. Even though they've been away from home for probably a week in Jerusalem, still they invite this stranger into their home. So he went indoors to stay with them, and then it happened. It's another phrase I love in this passage. I love the way Philip's worded that. Then it happened. While he was sitting at table with them, he took the loaf, gave thanks, broke it, and passed it to them, and their eyes were opened, and they knew him. For some reason, they didn't recognize him when they saw him. They didn't recognize him when he taught them, and yet when he broke the bread and gave it to them, their eyes were opened. But he vanished from their sight. Isn't that just like Jesus? Reveals himself and then moves on. Then they said to each other, "Weren't our hearts glowing while he was with us on the road, when he made the scriptures plain to us?" And they got to their feet without delay and turned back to Jerusalem. Now, imagine walking 7 miles will take a few hours if you're just walking along at a leisurely pace. I doubt that their return to Jerusalem took nearly as long. You can't claim that they may have ran the whole way, but I'm sure they hurried back there. There they found the 11 and their friends all together, full of the news, the Lord is really risen. He has appeared to Simon now. Then they told the story of their walk and how they recognized him when he broke the loaf. There are times when profoundly disturbing experiences will happen. And it's in those times it might be difficult to see the hand of God. And this was certainly one of those times, and yet Jesus gave them the opportunity to take a fresh look at what had occurred. That yes, his death on the cross was for a reason. And yes, the resurrection was for a reason. And that's an example of those times when you need to be able to step back and take a fresh look at something. In the Methodist Church, there's an experience called the Emmaus Walk, which is based on this passage. And it's a weekend designed to give people an opportunity to take a step back from life and take a fresh look at a relationship with Jesus. I urge you to do something like that. Maybe not the official Emmaus Walk, but that you take time in your life to step back and take a fresh look at things so that you can see in a new way the hand of God at work. Who are the beloved? Go and be the beloved.